Before we begin, I want you to do something for me. Close your door. Turn off the lights. Put your headphones on. Because what I'm about to tell you is not the kind of story you want to hear with other people around. Tonight's story is called The Tenant Below. Now, we've all had noisy neighbors at some point in our lives. Someone moving furniture late at night. Someone pacing back and forth at 2 a.m. You knock on the door. You complain. You move on. But what if the apartment making all that noise was completely empty? What if it had been empty for 3 years? And what if the thing making those sounds already knew your name? Tonight, we follow the story of Daniel Marsh, a regular man, a practical man, someone just like you or me who made one simple mistake. He moved into the wrong apartment, and from the very first night, something in the darkness below him was already aware. It had been waiting, pacing the same floor, breathing in the same silence, collecting the people who came too close. And now, Daniel was next. This is not a story about ghosts. This is not a story about demons. This is something worse. This is a story about something patient. Something that has learned after years in the dark that people always get curious. People always get close. And people always listen. So sit back, stay calm, and whatever you do, don't go checking what's under your floor tonight. Let's begin. Nobody told Daniel Marsh that the apartment below his had been empty for 3 years. He found out the way you find out most things you weren't supposed to know, by accident on a Wednesday night when he knocked on his downstairs neighbor's door to complain about the noise. It had started 2 weeks after he moved in. Small things at first. The sound of furniture being dragged across the floor below him. A slow, deliberate scraping that started around 11 at night and stopped precisely at 3 in the morning. Every single night. Not once did it vary. Not by a minute, not by a sound. 11 to 3. Dragging, scraping, the occasional dull thud of something heavy being set down and then picked up again. Daniel was a light sleeper. Had been since childhood. The kind of person who wakes at the sound of a car door closing 2 streets away. So the noise below wasn't just annoying, it was destroying him. 2 weeks in, he had purple crescents under his eyes and a short temper and a desperate, almost feverish need for one full night of uninterrupted sleep. So on that Wednesday at 11:15, when the scraping started again directly beneath his bedroom floor, he got up, put on his shoes, walked down 1 flight of stairs, and knocked on the door of apartment 4. Nobody answered. He knocked again, harder. "Hey, I can hear you moving furniture up there. I live directly above you and I'm trying to sleep. Can you please?" The door swung inward under his knuckles. It hadn't been latched, just resting against the frame, not quite closed. His knock had pushed it open maybe 4 inches, enough to see a slice of the apartment inside. Dark, no lights, and from somewhere inside the sound of something heavy being dragged slowly across the floor. Daniel pushed the door open wider. Hello? The smell hit him first. Not rot, not mildew, something older than that. Like the smell of a room that has not exchanged its air with the outside world in a very long time. Sealed, stagnant, the smell of a place that had been breathing only itself for years. He fumbled for the light switch just inside the door. The lights came on. The apartment was empty, not just unoccupied, stripped. No furniture, no fixtures, no curtains on the windows. Just bare floors, bare walls, and the faint rectangular outlines on the dusty floor where furniture had once stood. A couch, a coffee table, a bed. But the floor was not still. Across the center of the empty room, the dust had been disturbed. Recently. A wide path had been cleared, as though something large had been dragged repeatedly back and forth across the same track. The wood beneath was worn smooth, polished almost by repetition. Daniel stood in the doorway and stared at that track in the dust. Then, from directly behind the wall to his left, from inside the empty apartment, from somewhere he should have been able to see, came the sound of something being dragged. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. He left. He went back upstairs, locked his door, and told himself there was a rational explanation. A structural settling, old pipes, sound traveling strangely through the building. He believed this almost completely. Almost. The next morning he found the building's superintendent, a squat man named Vince who smelled permanently of cigarettes and carried a ring of keys large enough to anchor a small boat. "The apartment below mine," Daniel said. "Apartment 4. Who lives there?" Vince looked up from his newspaper with an expression that was hard to read. "Nobody," he said. "That unit's been off the market since 2021. Since 2021? Why? Vince folded his newspaper. Water damage, he said, in the tone of a man reciting something he has said many times and no longer believes himself. Structural issue. Not safe for occupancy. Vince. Daniel leaned against the counter. The floors look fine. I was in there last night. There's no water damage. The super looked at him for a long, flat moment. You went inside that apartment? The door was open. Another long look. Vince unfolded his newspaper and then folded it again, a nervous habit maybe. Don't go back in there, he said finally. And if you hear anything from that unit, and I understand that sometimes people do hear things, just put some music on. Sleep with a fan. White noise. Don't pay attention to it. There's something in that apartment, Vince. There's nothing in that apartment. He said it too quickly. Don't go back in. He picked up his newspaper and didn't look at Daniel again. Daniel told himself he would follow that advice. He bought a white noise machine. A good one, $60, 10 different sound settings. He set it to ocean waves and placed it directly on his nightstand and climbed into bed that night feeling almost optimistic. At 11 p.m., the dragging started. The white noise machine didn't matter. The sound didn't travel through the air the way normal sounds do. It traveled through the floor, through the frame of the bed, through the mattress, into his spine. Bone conduction. He could feel it more than hear it. A slow, rhythmic vibration in the structure of the building itself. He lay rigid in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to count the ocean waves. He made it to wave 43 before he gave up. He got out his laptop and searched for the address. There was not much. An apartment listing from 2019, before the building changed management. A brief mention in a local news archive from March 2021. A small article for paragraphs, the kind that gets filed on page 12 and forgotten. Resident reported missing from Eastfield Apartments. Raymond Cho, 34, a resident of Eastfield Apartments on Dunmore Street, has been reported missing by family members after failing to appear for a scheduled family dinner on March 14th. Cho, who had lived in the building since 2018, was last seen by neighbors on March 12th. Building Superintendent Vincent Greer stated that Cho's apartment appeared undisturbed. Police say there are no signs of foul play. If you have information. The article ended there. No follow-up. No resolution. Daniel stared at the name. Raymond Cho. Apartment 4. He typed the name into the search bar. Nothing. A LinkedIn profile that stopped updating in early 2021. A Facebook account, last active March 11th, 2021. The day before he was last seen. The last thing Raymond Cho had posted on Facebook was a single line of text, no context, no punctuation, posted at 2:47 in the morning. It keeps coming closer. Daniel closed his laptop. From below, the dragging continued. He would have left. He genuinely would have packed a bag and gone to a hotel and called his landlord in the morning to break his lease. Except that his landlord was Gerald Park, a man who answered emails 3 days late and phone calls never, and the lease had a penalty clause for early termination that would have cost Daniel 4 months' rent he didn't have. So he stayed. He bought better earplugs. He pushed his bed to the far corner of the room, farthest from the worst of the vibration. He developed a habit of leaving the television on all night, volume low. But he started noticing other things. The dragging always followed the same path. He realized this after the 3rd week, when he began, despite himself, mapping it out. He'd lie in bed and track the sound as it moved beneath him. From the eastern wall to the western wall. Back again. Then south to north. Back again. Over and over, the same pattern. Like something pacing. Like something that had been pacing the same path for so long it had worn a groove into its own routine. But occasionally, not every night, maybe once a week, the pattern changed. The dragging would pause somewhere in the middle of the floor. And then very slowly, it would move toward the ceiling. Toward his floor. And stop. Directly beneath his bed. Those nights, Daniel did not sleep at all. The 4th week, he started hearing the breathing. It came through the heating vent in his bedroom floor. A circular iron grate, original to the building, that connected his unit to the ductwork below. Had never thought about it before. Never had a reason to. Now late at night, when the dragging had been going on for an hour, and the apartment below felt less like an empty room, and more like a presence, he would hear it through the grate. In and out. In and out. Slow and deep, with a faint wet quality to it, like breathing through water. Not distressed. Not labored. Utterly calm. The breathing of something in a state of perfect patience. The first time he heard it, he pressed his ear to the grate and immediately wished he hadn't. because when he pressed his ear to the iron, the breathing stopped. 1 second of absolute silence. And then, from directly below the grate, from something that must have been pressed against the other side of the ductwork, close enough that he could feel the faint warmth of expelled air rising through the metal, a voice said, "I can hear you too." Daniel recoiled so hard he cracked the back of his head on the nightstand. He sat on the floor with his heart slamming and his vision briefly gone white, and he waited for something to happen next. Nothing happened. The dragging resumed. He slept with a towel stuffed into the vent after that. He called the police on a Thursday. He felt foolish doing it, but had run out of options. He explained about the sounds, about Raymond Cho, about the voice through the vent. The officer who came was young, patient, and professionally skeptical. He walked through Daniel's apartment. He looked at the vent. He went downstairs and looked at apartment 4. When he came back up, his expression was carefully neutral. "The apartment is empty, sir. There's no one down there. There was a missing person from that unit. Raymond Cho, 2021. I'm aware of that case. It's still open. So you're telling me that a man disappeared from that apartment 3 years ago, and the apartment has been empty since, and there's no explanation for the sounds I've been hearing?" The officer looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you that there is currently no one in that apartment." He said it with a slight but unmistakable emphasis on the word currently, as though the word had been chosen very deliberately. He left. Daniel watched his patrol car pull out of the lot from his window. As its taillights disappeared around the corner, the dragging started. It was 6 in the evening, 4 hours early. That night, Daniel set his phone to record audio and placed it near the vent, towel removed. In the morning he played the recording. For the first 2 hours, nothing but the dragging and his own breathing. Then, at 12:47, the dragging stopped. Silence for 4 minutes and 31 seconds. And then quietly but clearly the voice. "You've been very patient." A pause. He wasn't. The last one. He kept trying to find me. Kept looking. Another pause. Longer. That's how I found him. Daniel sat at his kitchen table with the phone in his hands and listened to the rest of the recording. For the remaining 2 hours and 13 minutes until 3 a.m., there was only one more sound. Not dragging. Not breathing. Knocking. Slow, measured knocking for beats at a time, emanating from directly below the kitchen floor. And with each set of 4 knocks, it was a little closer. A little closer. A little closer. Until at 2:59 a.m., the final knock came from somewhere that the recording picked up with perfect, terrible clarity. Not from below. From the other side of his front door. Daniel looked at the recording timestamp. 2:59 a.m. He looked at the audio waveform, large, clean, close. Right outside his door. He looked at his front door. And then at his phone. Desperate and quick, he scrolled to Danny's, to anyone's number. His sister. His mother. His college roommate. Someone he could talk to. Someone whose voice could be an anchor to the ordinary world while he figured out what to do. His thumb hovered over his sister's contact. The knocking came again. From his door. 4 beats. Patient. Unhurried. As though it had been planning this for 3 years. As though it had all the time in the world, and it knew with absolute certainty that eventually he would open the door. Daniel stood in the center of his kitchen, phone in hand, and didn't move. The knocking came a 3rd time. Then a 4th. Then silence. He stood there for a very long time, until the sky outside the window began to go gray with early morning, and the silence stretched and held, and he convinced himself, slowly and carefully, that it was over. That whatever it was had gone. He crossed to the front door. He leaned close and listened. Nothing. He looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. He exhaled, long and shaking and deeply relieved. He stepped back from the door, and heard, from directly behind him, from inside the apartment, the sound of something being dragged slowly across his floor. The next morning, the building superintendent found apartment 5 empty. Daniel Marsh's phone was on the kitchen table, audio app still open, recording still running. His keys were on the hook by the door. His shoes were neatly placed beside the bed. In the center of the bedroom floor, the rug had been moved aside. Beneath it, the iron vent grate had been pushed upward from below and was lying flat on the floor. The opening was just large enough for a person. Vince stood and looked at it for a long time. Had seen this before. Had seen it with Raymond Cho in 2021, and with the woman before Cho, and with the older man before her. He pulled out his phone. Called Gerald Park. It happened again, he said. Gerald Park was quiet for a moment. He'll update the listing, he said. Apartment 5 now too. Just apartment 5. 4 still, 4 is still occupied. Another silence on the line. Same as before? Same as before. All right. Gerald sounded tired. The tired of someone who had been tired about this particular thing for a very long time. They'll put 5 on the market next month. Leave 4 off. Gerald. Vince looked at the open vent in the floor. One of these days someone's gonna figure it out. They're gonna figure out what's down there, and they're not going to figure it out, Gerald said quietly. They never do. They just get curious. And then they get close. A pause. And then they get quiet. Vince hung up. He looked at the vent one more time. From somewhere below, not from apartment 4, but from somewhere beneath apartment 4, somewhere that shouldn't have existed in the building's floor plan, somewhere that no blueprint had ever shown, he heard it. The dragging. Slow. Rhythmic. Patient. And underneath it, barely audible, the breathing. In and out. In and out. And then, only once, only for a moment, and only because Vince had made the mistake of standing too still and too long in a quiet room. A voice. Your turn, Vince. He left so quickly he forgot to lock the door. Behind him, in the empty apartment, the dragging continued. In and out. Back and forth. Patient as the grave. Patient as something that has learned, across years and victims and the long silence between them, that walls are just wood and plaster. That doors are just barriers until someone opens them. That people, no matter how frightened, no matter how sensible, always, eventually, listen.